Hi, this is Nick Holland with Information Security Media Group. Today I'm talking with Tim Keeler, who is a co-founder and CEO with Remediant. Tim, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, great to be here, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, very welcome. So, one of the things we're going to talk about today, or the thing we're going to talk about today, is, I guess, the elephant in the room for cybersecurity these days, which is the SolarWinds breach that occurred back in December. You wrote an interesting blog post on that. Let me just share my screen, if I may, so that the viewers can have a look at that. So yeah, if you go onto the Remediant website, you can see here there's a resources tab, Remediant blog. And this is what we're going to talk about today. So it's the role of admin credentials in the SolarWinds attack. So Tim, you wrote this back in December. It's a great piece of analysis, I think. But maybe we could just kind of go through the various components of this particular blog piece. So the first one, and it's something that's come up a lot, I think, in the last year or so, is the damage that can occur with lateral movement. So this blog post starts out talking about lateral movement and how that has been particularly dangerous in the context of the SolarWinds attack. So maybe talk me through that first.
Yeah, I mean, lateral movement has been one of these attack vectors that's really plagued the industry for several decades now. And it's a strategy that originally came from nation state actors and now has kind of made its way all the way through, even when we take a look at ransomware, the various strains actually have built-in lateral movement and credential compromise. But, when we take a look at all the breach reports, it seems to be the common theme that comes up overall. And it's like, hey, it's much easier to get a hold of some credential in order to move around other areas within the network, right? From system to system, whether it's going from workstation to another workstation or workstation into a server environment, that helps you get to whatever your objective is. And so, here we've seen, this kind of being a key theme around the SolarWinds attack. And there's been a lot of really interesting technical breakdowns around the SolarWinds. And the thing that really was interesting to me was, okay, how this actually played its role in lateral movement. And more particularly, it's like, okay, like once a company was affected and they had their command and control set in place, what was happening from that point on? Like, what were these nation state actors doing in order to get to their objective, right? Because their objective wasn't just to get to the SolarWinds server, it was to use that as a pivot to get to other places. Right. And that's where lateral movement comes into play.
I mean, and the fallout from that is still occurring in real time. I mean, this is, we're only scratching the surface of the real implications of this.
Yeah. I really think we're going to see this, be popping up for 1 or 2 years to come. A lot of companies are doing their own analysis. We obviously saw for many legal reasons, governments had to publicly disclose their breaches. Companies are still going through their analysis to see, okay, is this something that I have to publicly disclose or something that I can manage internally, and even understanding if they were affected or not, which is really, really hard with this, because we saw the evasion techniques so high in these cases where it's really hard to understand. It's like, okay, like what accounts were compromised? Was there lateral movement going on? Because this just really looks like regular behavior at the end of the day. And a lot of, large companies aren't well equipped to understand, hey, is this just regular normal activity? Or, do we even have the logging mechanisms to turn on to actually understand if lateral movement was going on?
Well, and that plays into, I think, the next question, really, which is, I mean, clearly that is the biggest challenge with this lateral movement, the detection. So maybe talk me through just the key challenges there overall, and how could they be alleviated?
Yeah, I mean, so really, coming back from my incident days, this is a question that was so extremely to answer, because once there was a compromise in place, I'd always get asked, like, how do I know whether this is just an admin doing their regular activity versus someone using those credentials in a malicious manner to get access to other systems, right? Because if you're dealing with an environment that's 100,000 or 200,000 systems, when it's really hard to scale this out. It's like, okay, we're going to collect all logon events from all systems, and then two, it's actually, how do you actually discern and understand what is malicious and what is just your day-to-day behavior? And and this is a classic scenario here in this SolarWinds attack. And so the way we've been thinking about this is really coming in and changing some foundational ways that we're looking at this problem, instead of like, okay, we can talk about AI and anomalous behavior and all this stuff. That's really great and interesting. The reality is nobody is actually doing this really, really well. But we need to understand, it's like, okay, well, how do we actually stop this in the first place? If we go in with the mindset of assuming that a credential is already compromised, and then ask ourselves, okay, how do we put these mechanisms in place? How do we build strong security to actually prevent this from happening, and then allow us to start detecting these things? And that's where we really come in with this idea of least privilege, with Gartner is calling zero standing privilege. All this lines up with zero trust, with the premise of, okay, we need to understand and validate the identity, right? Because that is really kind of the focal point of all security, right? The network security is just kind of a bystander in this case, right? We have to go in and understand, it's like, okay, how do we actually stop that lateral movement from happening in the first place? And then understand, okay, what might be anomalous and malicious.
And I guess, I mean, the real issue today for a lot of organizations is that effectively everything looks anomalous, right? You've got people signing in at weird times. You've got people coming in from different regions. And as you said, well, nobody knows you're a dog on the internet, right? So it's kind of that fundamental issue. You knowing the credentials of the people, or even the machines accessing your network is absolutely mission critical now.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just take a look at, the COVID world that we're living in, where we have large amounts of our workforce completely remote, goes absolutely to your point of, hey, I'm doing my job all hours of the day, all hours of the night, right? That just makes things even more. And when you take a look at this from an external perspective, it's like, okay, well, I can't use IP-based detection because everyone is coming either through a VPN or some mechanism that helps them get access to the environment. And that just raises a huge amount of challenges there.
Yeah. So, I mean, your recommendation in the blog is that you remove 24/7 admin access so lateral movement can't occur, even if the intrusion occurs. So talk me through that a little bit, if you may.
Yeah, I mean, this is the area that attackers leverage the most. And that's because, when we take a look at the role of an IT administrator, whether it's, someone in your service desk that might have admin rights on every single workstation because they need to be able to manage and troubleshoot those systems, versus your server admins that also have 24/7 admin rights across the whole server environment or large sets of the environment. So when you couple this over time, right, we end up having this pervasive administrative sprawl. And this is the key part that attackers are they're leveraging. So they're understanding, it's like, okay, there's so many people out there that have, blanket admin rights. All it takes is one account to get compromised that allows me to start the initial steps of lateral movement. Then I can start harvesting more credentials, and it makes it really easy to get to my objective. In a lot of these cases, we see full domain controllers compromised, and that means a high level of persistence for a very long time in these environments. And so that is kind of the key principle that we walk in with. It's like, hey, if attackers are exploiting this, and when we start talking to IT admins and seeing what they're doing on their day-to-day job, they're just logging into a small number of systems at any given time, right? So on one side, we have this huge amount of risk out there because they have this 24/7, admin rights. But then, you see what they're doing, and it's like, okay, there's a big discrepancy there. And the best way to handle this is a philosophy that we bring forth of just-in-time access, where it's like, hey, if we start with the fundamentals of least privilege, by removing all of this persistent admin rights, we can then dynamically add and remove admin privileges when somebody needs to do their job, whether they need to log into a workstation to troubleshoot an end user, or they need to log into a server. And then you can combine this with strong authentication, so multi-factor authentication. And this vastly reduces a lot of that risk, because when you see one account that gets compromised, well, that shouldn't have blanket admin rights to all these different systems out there, right? And this is kind of the fundamental approach, which solves not just this area of SolarWinds attack, but a lot of other different types of things, including ransomware out there that's leveraging credentials.
No, it makes an enormous amount of sense. I mean, the default just should be zero access, right?
Yeah. And we get asked this all the time. It's like, well, why wasn't this just built from the ground up? And it's like, yes, we even inherited, bad security practices and legacy, architectures for a really long time. But this approach really helps you get scale. And when you think about this, it really shouldn't be like, okay, I'm just doing this across this 100 or 200 servers, which I deem as critical. This should be deployed across the entire enterprise, because lateral movement, as we know, always starts, at an end user workstation, or in this case, it was a SolarWinds server, which nobody really deemed as like, okay, this isn't mission critical, but this is kind of a key vector to get access to other systems.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Well, Tim, really enjoyed the discussion. Thanks so much for a great blog post again on the Remedium website. That's Tim Keeler, who's the co-founder and CEO with Remediant. And for Information Security Media Group, I'm Nick Holland. Thank you very much.